Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where this week we are pushing the limits on how far $1 can go at StarCityGames.com/sale. Until Monday, the 30th of August at 10:59 a.m. Eastern Time, we have marked down thousands, and I do mean thousands of singles, to just $1. And saving 50 cents on one single may seem like small fry, but if you're picking up a stack of cards for Commander, Cube, or maybe a Commander Cube, or anything else, those savings add up real quick, and they are waiting for you at StarCityGames.com/sale.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here,
along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends,
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts and right here on StarCityGames.com.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with a sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. You're inventive people. You'll find a way to make it work. So take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey, and I'm here with Ari Lax, who can tell you how to buy into modern without having to cut down on the avocado toast, or so I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I am one of the ultra boomers who actually still uses my own cards on my own Magic Online account. So I have been doing a decent amount of juggling the budget on that end. And I certainly have more resources than I would declare as like full budget on the account. But you definitely think about a lot of this stuff as you're like moving things around and figuring out what to do. So, we're going to talk about kind of figuring out where the best place to start in Modern is if you don't just want to have to buy Ragavans and Force and Negations and Ren and Sixes and like every single other Mythic Rare from a Modern Horizon set.
Yeah, I don't know if that collection at this point, is it more of a nest egg? Is it more of a reckless investment vehicle? I don't know where on that spectrum this is meant to land.
It is certainly better than basketball JPEGs.
Okay.
That's all I know.
I mean, in theory, these are conceptually kind of similar, right? Like the old adage about, well, you're just paying for a digital card. You can't even hold it in your hands. I don't know if that has aged well or badly, given the times we live in now.
Certainly better, I think. I think that, at least Magic Online doesn't light a tree on fire every time you try to trade someone a Ragavan.
Yeah, I mean, the world needs no help setting itself on fire at the moment. So it's nice to know that our favorite hobby is not contributing to that, at least quite in that way, at least. In any case, that is going to be our main topic for this week, is how to get into Modern on a budget or with that kind of concern in mind here. And this may be an especially timely point at which to record that episode because, as always, we're going to start off with going over the challenge results from the past weekend. And oh dear God, Ari.
Yeah, so we have the full list for Saturday, and the deck that won can only be described as Zoomerjunt. This is just the good cards in a deck. Urza Saga, Ragavan, Renin 6, Tarmogoyf, Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Unholy Heat, Lightning Bolt. Cards that you find with Urza Saga and a sideboard.
Yeah, this is Zuma Jund on a boomer salary, or at least a trust fund. Maybe that's the way you get into this here. But this is almost the perfect example with which to highlight this topic here, because this is not only the most valuable cards from Modern Horizons 2 and the current state of Modern, is almost a showcase of the most valuable cards from throughout Modern's history. So Tarmogoyf, for example, which back in the day, when the first Modern Masters, not Modern Horizons, Modern Masters was on the horizon, I guess, in 2013, that was the card that people wanted reprinted the most to make Modern affordable and to decrease that barrier to entry into the format, because if you wanted to play Jund, which at that time was actually the best deck and not just a nostalgic throwback, although maybe it's getting to that point again. I guess we can discuss that when we get there. At that point, Tarmogoyf was the main sticking point. That was the thing which you grit your teeth and had to buy into. Now it's come down to a more reasonable price, but it's here just with its I guess successors to that title. Renin 6 from the first Modern Horizons, which actually came down for a while there. There was a point in Modern where that card was not seeing too much play. Now it's everywhere, and for good reason, and that trend is only increasing. And so that card is, I think, now back to being the most valuable card from the first Modern Horizons, and shows no signs of slowing down there, whether in paper or online. And of course, you have the stars of Modern Horizons 2, both Ragavan and Urza Saga, where either one individually would put a hefty price tag on any given deck. And this one, of course, naturally has both of them.
Yeah, I just looked at the actual cost of this deck. I just saw like a lot of rares, and I'm like, yeah, that's a lot. And then I actually looked at the number, and wow. Don't sleep on those 4 copies of Mishra's Bauble either. Those that one has been I think literally the most expensive uncommon at various points, or common even at various points in the past. But yeah, this deck is Money Tribal, I believe is the moniker that people have assigned to similar decks in the past. And this is really the epitome, not just of that, but also of just playing all of the good cards. And you don't need to be playing stuff like Liliana with a Veil, Bloodbraid Elf, all of these higher curve, less reliable cards anymore, in a format where all the good cards cost 1 and 2. And we've thrashed the dead horse on that point so many times now. And I think that incentive would be strong even in a world where Lurrus didn't exist, but this is a world, sadly, in which Lurrus does still exist. And so with that in mind, yeah, that is the obvious way to build Jund, and it's almost surprising to me that it took people this long to get to this point. I think that there was some dabbling and stuff adjacent to this, but somehow people just got stuck on playing things that aren't in this deck. I don't really know exactly what those past lists had. Maybe they were missing the Urza Saga to tie it all together.
Yeah, I think that is the one point of divergence from this list compared to previous ones. You've seen these more sleek and refined Jund lists, which are just straight up Jund. You know, it's the good interaction and the good threats, and then all the good sideboard cards to back that up. But then there's this question of, Urza Saga, clearly a powerful card, is it worth warping your deck around, given that because you've already compressed your curve to such a great degree, you can't really make good use of colorless mana, and at that point, Urza Saga is much more of a spell than a land, and so you're cutting into other slots in your deck. And you can see with this list, for example, maybe a little less removal and maybe fewer discard spells than you might see in, let's say, a Rakdos Lurrus deck or a Mardu Lurrus deck, which maybe exists in a similar space here.
Yeah, I think you need them less just because of the scale of Tarmogoyf. You just don't need to fight over some of the smaller stuff that might actually get in the way of a Ragavan when you're like 6-7 Tarmogoyf is just hanging out and bashing people's faces.
Yeah, one of the main combinations that's worth highlighting here is Renin 6 and Urza Saga. And I think from the moment the Saga was spoiled, that was an obvious card to pair it with, but there's the obvious drawback of, well, Renin 6 costs 2 different colors of mana. Urza Saga itself isn't contributing to that, and I guess you can set up some backdoor route via like Chromatic Star or Springleaf Drum or something, but that's a lot of work to go to. And so how quickly in the game are you actually getting to the point where Renin 6 is buying back your Urza Saga? That's quite a few turns down the line. But if the rest of your deck is configured to delay the game to that point, as an interactive deck like this usually is, then maybe you have time to set that up. And Urza Saga, one of the issues with a shell like this is against another Lurus deck, for example, or against anyone hoping to grind you out with expressive iteration or these new control decks that are popping up thanks to Wafo Tapper, on which more in a second, then those decks can actually match you on that grindy axis. And Urza Saga is the best way to go past that. And so Ren 6 in conjunction with Urza Saga looks really appealing there.
Yeah, I really agree in terms of just like, I think something you also miss is that Urza Saga itself can inherently slow down the game. Like any game where the first Urza Saga is not enough because you need the second is going to take a while. And that is what buys you the time to get the Ren 6 stuff going.
There is you also have the adorable backdoor route of Urza Saga finds Expedition Map, which can find you other lands, including but not limited to a Ghost Quarter to pair with your Ren 6 to get that lock set up against a Tron deck, for example. I guess the counterpoint is, if you have the time to set that up against a Tron deck, then what the hell were they doing in the first place? But nice to at least have that theoretical out to console yourself with, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you could turn 1 Urza Saga, and then turn 3 float a mana, activate your map that you find off the Saga, and then leave yourself with 1 land, and they've been Ghost Quarter.
Which, hey, maybe that's a fair trade, especially if they had to aggressively mulligan to 5 or something in search of a good turn 3 Tron hand. That might be enough to do it. The other thing that Saga does in this deck, which is more subtle, is that if you think about the decks that have been the foil to a deck like Jund in the past, it's been stuff which just fights on a completely different axis from everything else. So a deck like Dredge, for example, where, sometimes you had a main deck Scavenger use or something, and if you had time, that could lock the game up, or there were games where you would Thoughtseize their one Cathartic Reunion and they just didn't do anything. But for the most part, you lived in fear of a turn 1 Faithless losing, for example, or something like that, because it meant that the game was about something completely new now, and a vast swathe of your deck was going to be irrelevant as a result. And Urza Saga is not just a fantastic tool in these fair fights, but it's also your best tool against a lot of these linear decks, where it can find a main deck Nile Spellbomb, for example, in this deck, or the Pithing Needle, or something else to actually shut those decks down.
Yeah, this deck sideboard also kind of lines up in a lot of the same ways, where like you are using Urza Saga as a reliable way to find hate, and then layering that with actual like additional hate cards for the matchups that you need them. Though I will note that Tarmogoyf is like sort of a hate card against Crashing Footfalls, so you don't need quite as much in that matchup.
Yeah, in theory, Crashing Footfalls is putting 8 to 10 power onto the battlefield, but the way that that's distributed is if you just control a 4/5, often that's enough to destabilize against them. And this deck is very good at controlling a 4/5. And the way that the Saga and Tarmogoyf sequencing lined up is often you will get to play Saga on 1, play Tarmogoyf on 2, and then when Saga pops itself on 3, that puts an enchantment in the graveyard. You probably had a land already. You have a bunch of fetchlands, but if you didn't, then that's a second card type that you've added there. And sometimes you're finding, let's say, a Mishra's Bauble or a Nile Spellbomb, which can immediately put itself in the graveyard too. So Saga by itself is enough to grow your Tarmogoyf to gigantic proportions. And this deck can't quite go for the full Monty here. We no tribal cards in the 75, unless I'm missing one here. But you can get a 7-8 Tarmogoyf with a surprising regularity, given that, Ren 6 as a Planeswalker, as one of the harder card types to get there, you've got that covered, and then Enchantment might be the other, and Saga covers you there too.
Yeah, I kind of want to turn to the sideboard and talk about Run Afoul. This is a card that's kind of floated around Modern a decent amount lately, and I assume that its resurgence has to do with, if you just cared about Murktide Regent, you could just play Terminate or something. But I think that the overlap here with all the cards that they would Indomitable Creativity for out of the 4-color decks is part of the reason you're loading up, in addition to the fact that it just kind of costs 1 mana and covers Murktide and Channeler.
Yeah, it's really hard to find something that hits all of Velomachus, Sarah's Emissary, Emrakul the Eon's Torn, even Archon of Cruelty in a list from this weekend, and some of the hybrid lists that maybe we'll get to eventually. And that's another application too, against a deck like Reanimator, for example, which is popping up here and there. Just having a good answer to Archon goes a long way. And So this card covers you on all of those axes, and some of the alternatives, stuff like Sudden Edict, for example, is inherently unreliable against a deck that has a bunch of Dwarven Mines and so on. So really nice to have a good, clean, cheap answer there. And I wonder if you would board this in against a deck like Is It Murktide as well, where hitting the namesake card goes a long way. And then it's kind of a double-edged sword insofar as, yeah, sometimes this will hit a channeler, and that's good, but sometimes they have a channeler and a region, and you really want to be able to hit the region. Although you do have stuff like a Nile Spellbomb to remove Delirium to set that play up if it comes down to it.
Yeah, I think just the fact that the game one configuration of this deck has basically no way to kill a Murktide Regent is a pretty big sign that you're leaning on run afoul there.
Yeah, one way to not kill a Murktide Regent, but to invalidate it would be Shadow Spear, allowing you to race with a giant Tarmogoyf or some giant constructs. Even just putting that on a channeler, getting that to a 4/4 goes a long way there. This list, it might surprise you to see, does not have a Shadow Spear, and that's not some Galaxy Brain strategic choice. The winner, Isaac Bullwinkle, just forgot to put a Shadow Spear in the deck, so would rectify that going forward into future weeks. But this does also show you who actually just copied and pasted the list and who took the list and made the recommended adjustments to it. So if you see a carbon copy of the 75 with 0 Shadow Spears there, then you know that they just went to Goldfish and made life easy for themselves.
Yeah, Shadow Spear feels like it's just a must-have in all these decks. It is extremely powerful in terms of just like changing. Again, I keep using this term scope when it applies to Urza Saga and like what it does to the game and what it allows you to stretch. But just having a single Shadow Spear really changes like what you are representing as your end game every single game.
Absolutely. So if you are a fan of Jund, then this looks like a fantastic template to build on here. I'm a little concerned about the colored mana requirements. You do have Ren and 6 to ensure all of your future land drops, but you do need to get that in the first place. And so in this deck with 24 total lands, one of those is a Ghost Quarter, which you can theoretically use on yourself to fix your mana, but you really don't want to. And then 4 of those are Urza Saga. Sometimes you're going to have these 2 landers, and one of those is a Saga, and it's hit or miss whether you can actually cast your spells in a useful time frame.
Did you remember that Ragavan is also Savage Lands?
Oh, how silly of me. Yeah.
Yeah, you just got to connect with the monkey and it's all fine.
Yeah, so somehow in the midst of talking about all of the cute interactions between Ren and 6, triggering Delirium and Tarmogoyf and everything else, we just overlooked Ragavan as, well, of course you're playing that card, why wouldn't you? And makes a ton of sense in that context too.
Yeah. So let's move on down to the second place finisher, who is basically the accumulated champion. This is Wafo yet again winning with yet again Azorius control.
Yeah, it's always nice when these people get to make a name for themselves on Magic Online with these repeated finishes in the challenges. So, Wafo Tapper, not a name that many of the Zoomers have heard of these days, but if he keeps this up, he'll be a household name before too long here.
Yeah, and it's really great when they get to do it with an archetype that kind of lets them stand out from the rest. There's not a lot of people previously winning with Azorius control, and now here is someone just, making a name for themselves, playing their way through with it.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the best day in Shaheen Sharani's life or one of the worst, because on the one hand, this is validation that a deck like this can do well in contemporary modern. On the other hand, if he had, thrown shade on any of these cards in the past, the main deck Solitudes or main deck Chalices or whatever, here comes the ultimate authority historically on this kind of control deck, just really showing him up here.
Oh, I thought the reason was, you were going to say it's not him winning with Azorius is the reason it could be bad.
Well, it could just be basic primal jealousy as well. We can't take that for granted either.
Yeah. Anytime someone's winning with Fact or Fiction in 2021 is good times. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Do you make anything of some of these individual card choices? We went over a lot of this last week, but stuff like 3 copies of Mystic Gate in the land base kind of stands out to me here. 3 copies of Castle Vantress too.
I think the Mystic Gate thing is just kind of an artifact of playing 3 Supreme Verdict and 4 Archmage's Charm, and I don't think you can get away from it there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's
yeah, you kind of need to have basic planes, right? At least one of those. This list has 2, and at that point, casting Counterspell, casting Archmage's Charm is easier said than done sometimes. So yeah, maybe you're just priced into doing that. I do love that this list has the one Ragavans Triome to power up Prismatic Ending to open up the possibility of a third color in there. But once you have the one Ragavans Triome, well, you get to play the one Crumble of Dust in your sideboard to make those Tron matchups just a little bit better.
Yeah, it does look like all the real nonsense has disappeared from this deck. There's no more summary dismissal or tempted by the Auric, which is sad, but like, come on.
Yeah, maybe you can find better ways to accomplish those goals. I still think Tempted by the Auric is the best card out there for what it does, but what it does may not be so important anymore. One trend that you highlighted over certainly the past week is these Renin 6 plus the Fairy decks have been on a bit of a downswing, and those are the matchups where you really want to have access to that effect. Having said that, looking at this first place deck with Renin 6 and all of these really cheap, beefy creatures, can imagine that card being fantastic there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty perfect transition into a bit of why those decks have made a downturn with that third place list. It's Burn, it's Rakdos, Boros, Mardu. It's just burn spells. Bump in the Night is actually showing up.
Yeah, and this is, I would say like 2017, 2018 Modern is when people experimented with Rakdos Burn, just cutting the somewhat clunky white cards, which is weird to say when they cost 2 mana, but when you look at the rest of this deck's mana curve, it starts to make sense, and just keep things as sleek as humanly possible. And Bump in the Night as another good 3 damage or 3 life burn spell for 1 mana was a big part of that. Haven't seen too much more of that since then, but maybe making a resurgence there.
Yeah, I think that like this deck and Tron, and there's been some rumors of Dredge being played here and there. Those are just kind of what's pushing back these control decks that are like, this is a very traditional Modern matchup of like the control. I don't think the Renin 6 decks are absolutely cold to burn, but I would not want to be playing the 4-color deck against burn if I had a choice. This deck, I think the only other really important thing to highlight is just the large number of Deflecting Palm. Pretty crucial card against both the like splash of Amulet Titan we've seen, but really the Pure Steel Paladin decks.
Yeah, that's a card which always gets overboarded by less experienced burn players, and I think they place a higher premium on it than they should. But the things that it's good at, it is really good at. It is the best possible card at. And so identifying those spots is a pretty big level up moment with this deck, I think.
Yeah, so we've got another burn deck in this top 8. We've got Mill, which is blue burn or Delver. I don't know. However you want to classify that deck, nothing new has happened with it. There's this continuing argument about which Luris deck you should be playing, Rakdos or Grixis. Do we have any more thoughts on this debate, or which one might be better? I kind of like Kaya's Guile right now, but I don't have strong opinions either way.
Yeah, I think we've gone over most of that ground in the past, and I don't know if this batch of results adds anything new to that. We'll know that the 5th place Mardu finisher here is Edward 40 Hands, which that name might not mean anything to you, but the name Sol Malka will, if you are a boomer like ourselves. So one of the godfathers of the black-green mid-range deck before Modern even existed, back when it was extended. And so good to see him still flying the flag, and with under different colors this time. Maybe that flag has changed a little bit. But you can also just have your cake and eat it too. So this is the 4-color approach that Eduardo Sajglic, among others, have been putting up decent results with. And this is, I don't know if they would describe it as Grixis Splash White or Mardu Splash Blue, like Moist Mardu. It's really a throwback to the days of Battle for Zendikar Standard, where you had all of these like 3.5 color decks, and there was this interminable and very tedious debate over which of these are the primary 3 colors and how are you meant to name these decks. And I'm sure Cedric's life was absolute hell during that time. But I think you can do that, but the cost seems pretty high.
Yeah, I remember those decks having to cut down significantly on the creature base too, when like I think a huge part of the debate is already like how good is Cruxa, and just like I don't especially know why you're playing these black versions of the deck over the Izzet versions if you start cutting those kind of cards. Yeah,
so I especially qualified to weigh in on that debate, but I don't think this week's results add anything new. One thing which, if you you do get that adventurous you have to watch out for is Blood Moon. And Blood Moon is back to being a fantastic card in Modern, I think. And maybe the always has been meme is appropriate here, but right now I think it legitimately is very good. And so we see a somewhat less conventional Blood Moon deck here in 8th place, Ari, which I know you have some strong feelings about.
Yeah, I tried this deck a while back, and I'm going to say this again later, because we're going to talk about budget decks. This deck's actually, like, reasonably inexpensive to put together. This is the Goblin Charbelcher deck that Sodek played. It's not good. I can appreciate fixing some of the issues with the list that popped up a couple weeks ago, where you actually have the Recross the Paths kill. But I am not impressed by this deck. It is, in the Spirit Guide days, it was like kind of fast enough, but right now there's just this huge issue with it where like so many of your lands just like line up wrong, like all the Balaget recoveries and like Song Mad Treacheries and Spikefield Hazard. Like, you have so many tap lands for this combo deck that's like trying to set all this stuff up, and like I'm not into it. I think that there's like a very, very slight thing to discuss here where like this challenge top 8 has basically, I mean, it has Drown in the Lock, but like there isn't a Izzet deck and there isn't a Cascade deck. And I don't want to participate in any match where my opponent is like 1-drop counterspell or like my deck has Force Negation and just be like, well, my cards are dead. I'm dead. Great job, me. Yeah, I'm just really off it.
I do think part of this deck's success probably is down to Blood Moon just being a 1-card combo effectively against many decks in the format right now. And I think you gain some equity from Spikefield Hazard just being a decent removal spell to fire off on a 1-drop against those decks. As you say, I think the interaction that people show up with does matter a lot, where being a Leyline of Sanctity combo deck against some of these Rakdos or Mardu decks actually sounds like a pretty decent place to be. Whereas the counterplay against Counterspell, Archmage's Charm is a little bit less reliable, and Pact of Negation and Veil of Summer go some way there, but you need your cards to line up well. And so Sodek, who is modern expert, combo expert, who is the one behind this deck, has said himself that this is a call to exploit a specific metagame and not a fundamentally sound deck that has that kind of long-term staying power. And so even though, to segue into our main topic here, before we immediately segue back out of it, even though this is a good budget choice on the surface, it's not going to be the kind of deck where you can show up to a tournament with it every week and feel like you have a puncher's chance. And on top of the fact that this deck does not have the most replayability, to put it that way, I would say, then I don't know if that's the wisest choice from that perspective.
The first place deck in this tournament has Thoughtseize and Pithing Needle.
Yeah, that's not ideal. Yes.
And Ghost Quarter. How do you can't defeat that? That matchup is so bad. Is that
it wouldn't surprise
top
me.
8? No, it was something else. Okay, you just lost to Burn. Okay, I don't even think you're faster than Burn.
Yeah, like another matchup where you're leaning real hard on Leyline of Sanctity to rescue that. Can I draw attention to the 1 copy of Pyromancer Ascension in this deck sideboard, which I'm sure there's some very arcane and specific Recross the Paths pile where that card actually, like, you cast several mana neutral copies of Strike the Rich or something, and now you're generating mana, whatever. I'm not quite sure exactly. And then sometimes you just draw that card and you happen to draw 2 rituals or mana officers or something, and it somehow lets you do a lot of things, although I don't know where those things get you exactly.
I think if you copy your Recross the Paths, Magic Online crashes and you get a refund.
I don't think you get a refund. I think you get banned from the platform for life, although maybe it's something in between there.
Yeah, that is a refund of your life, I guess. I don't know. It's some degree of refund.
It's a refund of your time, for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
One other note maybe from this Saturday challenge is Bogles showing up just outside this top 8 once again. And another deck which is relatively cheap in current Modern terms, and also I think a metagame call rather than a deck that's aged especially well. But with Bogles, it feels like it's a metagame call more often than you might expect, and there are lots of decks which fundamentally just end up being quite weak to Bogles. And there are some good, more universal tools for fighting that deck now. So sometimes they get to prismatic ending your Hyena Umbra and your Daybreak Coronet falls off, and now you just don't have a creature anymore, right? But by and large, there are lots of decks which, if you just lead on Gladecover Scout, their heart sinks into their stomach, and when that's the case, this is a good place to be.
Yeah, I think the last time we saw this winning was during like the height of Azit's success. I'm a little more skeptical now that, like, I mean, it may just be me having spent the last week playing with a lot of Force of Vigor, which that's a tough card for Hexproof to play against. But your matchups are going to be really, really polarized.
Yeah, we mentioned in the past a few weeks ago that being a linear deck that has access to strong sideboard cards is a good recipe for success right now, and this kind of fits the bill there. You get to be a Force of Vigor deck yourself if you want to. Leyline Sanctity lines up very well against a lot of decks. Suppression Field here, Gadok, Damping Sphere, Hushbringer, and the one card which isn't just lights out for a certain portion of the field in the sideboard is the one Lewis, which adds another dimension to this deck as well. So this gets to be a surprisingly hateful deck in post-sideboard games, in contrast to its very, very linear game one strategy.
Yeah, you definitely have to be doing that with this deck, but this list is succeeding at that.
Absolutely. And in terms of the return of these boomer decks from years past, so Burn, fantastic matchup, and especially when you add Leyline into the equation there. Tron, not so much. So I don't know if that's a wash, depending on how much of each of those decks you expect. And then stuff like Dredge or decks which have had to be dragged kicking and screaming into current modern. I think Bogles tends to line up fairly well against.
Yeah, it's kind of awkward that like the All Is Dust plan from Tron has like made the matchup significantly worse because you can't just steal it on the play the way you used to be able to. I used to not be if that matchup was acceptable, you could play your way through it sometimes, but the current Tron lists have really cranked it down to the point where I would not want to be anywhere close to the Hexproof side of that. But a lot of the other stuff, yeah, I would watch out very specifically for Living End. That matchup is I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked. I remember there was a Modern Pro Tour, I want to say Valencia, where some people I tested with played Hexproof. And their plan to win against Living End, this is like one of those PT Urban Legends things where it's like they didn't board in Rest in Peace because they couldn't beat the Living End player just having 8 Wrath of Gods in their deck. And they had to beat Living End by like playing a Spirit Dancer, letting it die to Living End, not dying to the Living End, playing another Spirit Dancer and forcing them to like Living End to bounce between the two. It's really bad. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, that one may be a lost cause, sadly. So I think that will do it for the Saturday top 8. Let's move on to the Sunday challenge top 8, which I don't think has been officially published, but we have this information anyway, thanks to Bamzing. So this is Bamzing_NPG on Twitter, BAMZING_NPG, who publishes a lot of the modern results in a pretty timely fashion if you want to get all the up-to-date news there. So they're a very good follow. And it looks like the death of Murktide region may have been exaggerated here. Blue-red Murktide taking the whole thing down. And then in second place, we have Raffo Tapper's blue-white deck in the hands of what looks to be another young French up-and-comer, possibly another friend of Raffo Tapper, Gabriel Nassif, I think is how you say it.
Yeah. You know, just sometimes an entire nation espouses a strategy and nothing can change them.
Yeah, what we really need is for one of these tournaments to be in some very hostile time zone to like Central Europe, just to, get this entire contingent out of the way, and then you can bust out all of the decks that are weak to Counterspell and Supreme Verdict.
Yeah, the Murktide deck's just really good. I know, I've heard through the grapevine discussions from people whose opinions I significantly value in terms of just like a broad evaluation of the format. People like, Colin Roundtree, who you don't really hear a ton from these days, but like just kind of wins a lot. Top 8 of the Hunter Burton Memorial Open. I don't know what he's played besides that recently, but just like top 8ing everything he plays. And just his testing just repeatedly is just like, yep, the good decks are like Hammer, Murktide, and a Cascade deck. Then like someone else will be like, yep, I played, Hammer, Murktide, and Cascade deck. Like it is, so, you can get wrapped around these metagames and things changing. The Murktide deck is so good. The Hammer deck is really good. The Cascade deck is really good. It's really hard to like go horribly wrong when you're playing one of these. And that's kind of the trend we see with this top 8 is like, it's just a list of the good decks in Modern. Plus Yawgmoth.
Yes. So to round out this top 8, we have Crashing Footfalls here in third. What Bamsing has listed as Burn built correctly, which I don't know if that means actually putting the lures in your sideboard, which I cannot believe people have taught themselves out of doing that somehow, but there we go. And then 2 copies of Living End, Abzan Yawgmoth, and then Blue White Hammer, which I'm not sure what the blue is for there. There was a list a while back that had a Spell Stutter Sprite, which I was never sure if that was absolutely genius and inspired or a massive scam which you should stay away from. I could believe that it's either or both at the same time.
Yeah, I did try to go through some of these people's histories to see if I could, glean anything from the list. So Max Vervort 2002 is the Twitter handle of the Teamer Footfalls. I believe it's like Max Magic is the Magic Online name. Just Teamer Football player. I want to say in the last week, top was the PTQ top forward losing to Wafo and like crush something else. This is the like maxed out on Fury's list without a Murktide region of Teamer Footfalls to go kind of against the Doomwake list. Let's see. The Abzan Yawgmoth deck predicted had a top 16 with it's the Ether Vial Night of Autumn list that we mentioned a little while back. So that was what they were playing when they top 12 like a week ago. So I can only assume it's the same thing. And then the Hammer player didn't have blue in their deck last week. They top 16 to challenge. This was a challenge or a PTQ. I didn't check which, but they had main deck magnetic or 2 magnetic theft. So I think they may have juked a little bit from that, but like I don't have like a great idea of what they'd be playing blue. But like a lot of these people are people who have played their deck and just keep playing their deck and keep winning.
Yeah, I will say the card Spell Stutter Sprite. Again, don't know if that's what this splash was for here, but that card seems the best that it's ever been, which admittedly in Modern is not saying that much, but still in a format where there are 2 different very good Cascade decks where all of the other decks have super low curves, a ton of 1-drops, a ton of 0-drops, I suppose, and 2-drops as well. I don't know if there actually is a good home for that card, but that by itself might be a good incentive to play a deck or to build a deck around it.
Yeah, there's more flexibility in those Hammer lists than you think. There's a lot of bad cards in those decks that kind of are like the best things to set up what's going on. But I know that, I mentioned Colin Roundtree, top 8 of the Hunter Burton Memorial Open with Hammer. And there's like an Ingenious Smith and a Cranial Plating in that deck that you could just scratch those off the list. You could probably cut the 3rd Esper Sentinel, especially because the 4-color decks are dying down. And that was like the best matchup for that card. And that gives you a lot of room to play with whatever you want. The mana's, as long as the lands that you're going to add to that deck still produce white, you're not really messing with anything. You can get a lot of work out of that mana base.
Yeah, speaking of customization, one of the Living End lists from the Saturday challenge in the hands of Belfi, who I think is one of the more frequent Living End grinders. This is almost a Living End deck modeled on the Crashing Footfalls decks, where when Bamsing was doing the data collation before, they would always use to list Living End either with Grief or without Grief as 2 separate things. And eventually, Grief became so ubiquitous that they stopped doing that, and it was just Living End from there on out. And this is almost an antiquated list in the sense that there's no Grief here. This is actually straight Teamer. And we have 4 copies of Endurance in the main deck, so that seems like one of the best possible cards you could have access to in the mirror, but then also against some of these DRC, Ragavan decks, and also just in general, one way that some decks just accidentally end up being good against Living End. So on the back of stuff like, Arcbound Ravager or stuff that ends up bidding itself, this is, I guess, occupying the spot that Fairy Macabre used to in terms of clearing that stuff out to clear the way for your own Living End and not get trumped by your own card. And Endurance just does that in a much more impressive way. So I kind of like that angle. But the other thing that we have going on here is 3 main deck copies of Tetanoth Rex. So this is a banger from Ikoria. This is a 7GG 11/11 with trample. It has cycling for 1 and a green, and when you cycle it, you put a trample counter on target creature you control. And so this is the biggest possible thing by like a wide margin that you can cycle to reanimate with Living End. And the issue with Living End in the past has been sometimes when you need to fire off a small Living End for 1 or 2 creatures, maybe you're equaling the board presence that a Crashing Footfalls would produce, but then you're also giving them something back at the same time, or it's not enough to beat the board. Just 1 copy of Tetanoth Rex is almost always the biggest thing going on and a serious game-winning threat by itself. And you only need to back that up with barely anything else for that to do it. So I don't know if this is an upgrade or a side grade or whatever it is on the conventional list. And I think you can mix and match certain elements here. But that might be another way to go, is if you want to fit more interaction into this deck, one way you do that is to add cards which you cut down on the cyclers, but then you need all of those cyclers to be better pound for pound. And this is a way to do that. That being said, in this list, it's taking the space of Waker of Waves, which kind of did that same job in the more traditional list. So maybe that's a wash there.
I like Tetanoth Rex just as like a, I think that it is a little bit better than Waker in terms of like actually single-handedly ending the game. The thing that concerns me about this list, because Living End is one of the decks I've liked the most over the last week, and it is what I actually wrote my article about because Ross wanted to talk some smack about Living End and say this whole nonsense about Crash Gate being a better deck when like, I'm not going to get into it. You can read the article. But one of the things I pointed out is like how clutch the interaction of Grief versus Endurance is, because Endurance is everywhere in Modern right now. And this deck giving up Grief, I think the thing I would look to do is to max out those subtleties in it, because I think that you need whichever incarnation you're using to line up against Endurance. And actually, like, one of the really good parts about the other Living End deck is that you actually go up beyond the 4 Grief to like 4 Griefs and like 2 to 3 subtleties after sideboarding, to the point where like Endurance is just not that good against Living End.
Yeah, which is weird to say, but it ends up being true. And this list, notably, no Street Wraith, right? And so that card is not just a concession to needing black cards for Grief in the other deck. It is just one of the best cyclists in the deck, right? As a card that cycles for free, it lets you cheat on your land count a little bit because you have redraws to hit your land drops early. A good way to pad out the graveyard. And there's nothing saying you can't play that card in here. So this list from Belfi has both Bonecrusher Giant and Brazen Borrower in the main deck, as well as 2 Fury, 2 Foundation Breaker. So a very broad mix of interaction, as well as some other unconventional cyclers like Desert Ceradon, Deadshot Minotaur. So you can chop and change a bunch of those cards, and maybe the synthesis here is you have a bunch of Tetanoth Rexes and Endurances, but you just add those Street Wraiths back in anyway. I could see that being smart. In your experience, how do these Living End mirrors tend to play out, especially when both players have a bunch of Endurances, a bunch of counter magic, and so on after sideboarding?
Oh god, no, I'm not. No,
no, just figure it out for yourself,
about
people.
The Living End mirror. We're not. We're not. We're just not. Yeah. It's I know. Oh my god. So it's bad. The inherent problem with the Living End mirror is that like at every point in time you need to like put enough stuff into your graveyard so that to match their graveyard, but hold enough stuff in your hand so that after they Living End you can put more stuff into your graveyard to relive. You see the problem. We're not.
Yeah. It's all about tempo. Anyway, moving swiftly on. I think converge on our main topic here after a short break. A much needed short break.
The SCG Tour Online is back. Starting Friday, July 23rd, you can play the best events in competitive Magic for thousands of dollars in cash prizes, piles of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena qualifier invitations to skip that mythic grind, and at the very top, invitations to the MTG Arena Championships and the StarCityGames.com Invitational returning to Roanoke, Virginia from October 29th to October 31st. You heard that right. The SCG Invitational is also back. And you know the best place to qualify for it? That's right, the SCG Tour Online. Check out starcitygames.com/SCG Tour online to register for events, see upcoming event schedules, and get all the details on how you can earn prizes and invitations playing the SCG Tour online.
All right, so let's dive into our main topic here for the week, and that is Modern on a Budget. And that is a somewhat reductive title, and that word budget means different things to different people. So I guess maybe a murky definitional debate is the best way to start here. Ari, what is a budget?
Yeah, so I think there's like 4 different levels of budget in Modern right now. There's the true budget part, to which I cannot honestly say that it is feasible to build a truly good Modern deck on like you're gonna have to do some real stretching to like actually hit like true budget. You know, like I have $100, I would like a Modern deck. I think that that's a lot to ask right now. I think that like if you actually look, it's really kind of funny. If you look at the Magic Online League results, like the 5-0s from this week, there is not a single deck listed that is under like $300 or $400 in paper. There's some that are less than that in Magic Online tickets, and you might be able to play like I know there was that Elder Deep Fiend Tron deck from like a week or two ago. But like, it's kind of a big stretch there. And I think that, I don't know, maybe the best deck. I know actually I have to look up the price of what Vengevine is before I even say this. But the like pseudo hollow one decks are like the closest thing there.
Yeah, I would say that I don't know how much Burn specifically loses out from not having either the white splash or the black splash or both, I guess, for that one player this week. But mono red burn gets you to like 80% capacity for a good Modern deck for a pretty reasonable price. I know that Eidolon of the Great Revel and Goblin Guide used to be randomly expensive, but I don't know how true that is anymore. But I think the real hit in that category would actually be mono red Paris, which if you update that deck without that concern in mind, maybe Ragavan is part of the equation, but I think it's more likely that just Swift Spear, Salscar Mage, Dragon's Ray Channeler, that is your suite of 1-drops that you want, and then maybe Bedlam Reveler as a secondary threat or something. And then past that, I guess Blood Moon as a sideboard card might actually be the main expense that you're shelling out for here, but past that, unless I'm forgetting something serious, the rest of the deck shouldn't be too extreme.
I'm actually double checking this all, but I'm pretty sure that all of those, you know, previously expensive creatures that you talked about, aside from Ragavan, yeah, you can buy any one of those for under $10 on starcitygames.com. Though the Eidolons are played as opposed to near mint. You know, you can pay the extra dollar.
They're going to be played at some point, and now they're just being played immediately, so it's all good. Actually, I guess, is Mishra's Bauble the confounding thing there?
Oh, yeah. That card is, I mean, we'll get to this in a minute, but I don't think that card is, despite what it is in Magic Online, I think that the paper releases of that card have kept it slightly more reasonable. Again, it's like another card in the sort of, you know, $11.99 on starcitygames.com range.
Well, I see. Did you just look that up, or are you Nostradamus here?
No, I literally looked it up.
Okay,
you can even buy a foil. These are Iconic Masters foils. Those are from the years where the foils are dicey. We're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll steer clear of both those and that topic altogether for now here. But yeah, Mishra's Bauble, very affordable over at starcitygames.com. Anyway, so I think that is staying within that very strict guideline here. I think those are your main options. Is there anything else that's semi-plausible at least?
I think it's really hard. And I think we can just approach this topic right now because so much of Modern is the fetch shock mana base. And you're not getting into that at that budget range right now. And it's the thing about that is when I was kind of compiling a lot of these decks, I can't really say that like it's not going to get better than right now to obtain fetchlands if you don't have them, right? Like we saw this exact trend with Modern Horizons 3, the multicolored one, where the fetchlands were printed. They were printed into the set. The prices dropped a little, and then they skyrocketed back up within, you know, however many months. So like if you don't have fetchlands now and you're debating what should you do? The ones that were reprinted in Modern Horizons 2 are cards that you should be looking for.
Yeah, I think you meant Modern Masters 3, right? Although maybe.
Oh yes, Modern Master. Modern.
that might be an interesting glimpse into the future where there's some like Alara Reborn style MH3 set that just goes completely off the rails.
Side tangent. I think that would be kind of awesome because I think that one of the things that Alara Block did very well in terms of card design is that it made a lot of powerful cards, but by the nature of them being multicolored, they were all pushed to 2 mana or more. So it was kind of dicey and standard, just like how it worked out. Like, you just had to start the game on 2 with a lot of these decks. But like in terms of like modern, like Alara and Ravnica, like they all tend to put power into this 2, 3, 4 cost BAM. That's like really good if those are the best cards.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. And yeah, so it both works against that ever-present incentive, but even more present now to just play the cheapest cards and the best cards, and often those are the same thing, and those two things are connected. And also, because these cards have quite specific mana requirements, even in a fetchland, shockland format with other good mana fixing as well, it's not free to play all of those cards in the same deck. And so you get some more inherent variety, and you don't have these Zoomer John piles where you just take literally the 5 best and most expensive cards from the new set and just play them all in the same deck together.
That's until they print BAMP Trial.
Oh God. Okay. Well, is that only a matter of time at this point?
I don't know. I think that anytime you question a card from Magic 2020 through Ikoria, there's definitely more of an if on that statement.
Yeah, it feels weird for that cycle to not be completed, but at the same time, does it need to be completed? Because kind of what it does is like your 4-color deck that already has Ketria Triome and Ragavans Triome, does it need a Bant Triome? Like, it would get better, but it doesn't, strictly speaking, need it, right?
It might have to do with like what I haven't gone through the math. It might have to do with what your base color requirements are. But anyways, back to the main topic. I had 3 other sort of categories of budget that are worth discussing. There's the Magic Online rental limit budget. I don't even know what the max on these services is, but like the amount you would be paying weekly to rent the deck that won the challenge, the Zoomer Jun deck, is like comical.
Yeah, it's I think you would have to almost either win the challenge or at least do very well for that week of rental to pay for itself, unless you're just grinding some absurd volume.
Yeah. And then the other 2 are, there's this idea that like, you don't want to like, one of the reasons these decks are so expensive is because they have Ragavan and Ren and 6 and Urza Saga. And maybe you're more on the range of like, well, I could obtain just Urza Saga or something like that. What can I do with just one of these cards? Or you have all the old stuff. Like one of the things recently that is kind of a budget question is like Stoneforge Mystic is a lot right now. Let me look this up real fast because it has gone all over the place. StarCityGames.com, we have $70 for a double master Stoneforge Mystic. Yeah, that is definitely a card that is going to eat into your budget unless you have been playing with these cards for 10 years and may have had Stoneforge Mystics from then. But like we've said, a lot of these are new cards that have been added to the format because of the Modern Horizon sets, because of Throne of Eldraine and all this stuff. And there's kind of this issue of like, what do I want to add to my collection? Because I have X amount of the base. Where do I go from there?
Yeah, I think this was a common route, certainly that people used to take to get into Modern, where you would take the sticker shock up front of buying a set of Mox Opals, for example. And the idea was that, all right, well, I have my affinity deck, and if I get bored of that at some point, or, I'm either not willing or not allowed to play it anymore, then these Mox Opals will serve me well elsewhere in, KCI, Hardened Scales, Lantern, somewhere else. I can find a good use for these. And so I think that's a big part of why that one specific event, the banning of Mox Opal, actually did a lot to drive a lot of people out of the format. And I think you see that across the board. It's you have these various pillars which promise some amount of flexibility. And so buying into one, maybe you're anchored in a particular deck or archetype, but in theory, you can branch out elsewhere. And so introducing those new pillars in the form of Urza Saga and Ragavan and so on almost sets the clock back to square one in that sense, where these are the new pillars, and then also maybe the deck you were playing before needs those cards to be a passable version of what they used to be.
Yeah, and I do think there are like a few of those pillars where like I cannot imagine them being the pillar that you buy into just because they are so tightly linked with other pillars. And the three that come to mind are Ragavan, Force Negation, and Wrenn and 6. I don't think any of the Ragavan decks gets away without being filled with a bunch of other Modern Horizons 2 mythic rares and things like that, which are just gonna maybe like the mono red deck, but even then it's like Furies and Season Pyre. It's a lot. I cannot really see Ragavan being the entry point into Modern for someone looking to buy in halfway.
Yeah, I guess the route that you get there is the other approach you mentioned of, I already have the John deck that I was playing from 2012 to 2018 and have added a few cards to across the years. And I'm just getting back into Modern now. Maybe I took a break either organically or because of COVID or whatever it is. I'm looking to update my deck for 2021 Modern. And now I'm finding myself facing this question of, do I stay stuck in the past or do I bite the bullet and pick up these Ragavans?
Yeah, I think in that very, very specific situation, you should probably go with the Soul Malka route of just playing the Grixis or Rakdos Ragavan Channeler deck, if that's the direction you want to take.
Is there... maybe there is some argument for, in the Soul Malka vein, of scaling that back to just straight Golgari or something, which sidesteps the issue of Wrenn and 6 and Ragavan and so on. You end up with maybe a less powerful deck in the abstract, and maybe this Golgari deck actually, in the same vein as the list that Isaac Bullwinkle used to win the challenge, maybe that wants to be an Urza Saga deck. And so you reintroduce that problem through the other door. Although I don't think Saga is anywhere near as cost prohibitive at this point as the red cards are.
We'll get to that in 1 second. But yeah, I think that if you are trying to play a mid-range deck, and we'll get to this in a second, I think there's a lot of costs that you have to pay in terms of cutting back on the high demand cards. And I think that's just how it's always been in Modern. Like when you talk about the Jund days, it was like, oh, I have to have Tarmogoyfs and Lilianas. And if I move away from that, my deck is much worse. Or I need Snapcaster Mage and whatever else was in that deck. And if I don't have those, my deck is much worse.
And that was always the joke, right? It was that you somehow saw so many more foil Jund decks than foil decks of any other archetype, even though, in theory, that was the most expensive and the most daunting task to foil out of any archetype in the format.
Yeah, if you're in for a bit of it, you're in for all of it. I think one other important thing to note is that there's a lot of, I was doing this research and looking at the price of decks. There's a lot of price tied up in a few sideboard cards right now that are interchangeable to some degree, where it's like, you don't need to play this exact version of the sideboard card. It's just there because it's a bit better. I think there's like one exact exception where like you get a lot of equity out of one of these specific sideboard cards. But I think in most of the other situations, you can make do switching those out. And the three cards that I've kind of identified, I think there's a fourth honorary one on Magic Online, but the three big ones are Chalice of the Void, Endurance, and Force of Vigor. So Chalice, I don't even really like Chalice that much against the like one-drop decks anymore. So I think that a lot of the value of Chalice of the Void can just be overlapped with some card that is stopping your Cascade opponent, whether that's like Void Mirror or Drannith Magistrate. Yeah, Chalice costs 0. Those other cards, though, have other uses that are pretty important. So I don't think you lose a ton by making that swap. Endurance, I mean, it's, again, you're not... Elementals is a deck that we've kind of like excluded from this because the entire deck is Modern Horizons 2 Mythic Rares, right? Like, I don't think you're going to be like endurancing with that. And aside from like that and like Living End, which is a Force Negation deck, the interactions with Endurance being like a synergy piece are not the most important. What deck was I playing a couple weeks ago where I made the exact note where it was the Bring to Light decks, where the first Endurance is nice because it is a free graveyard height spell that you can bring to light for, but every other Endurance past that was not even good. So I think that you don't lose a ton on Endurance as long as you are like moving a couple copies to Soul Guide Lantern or Relic, very specifically because some of the what you're asking Endurance to do is overlapping, covering the actual graveyard decks and covering against Luris, and you need a couple of your graveyard interaction spells to be high card equity. And then Force of Vigor, if your deck is not specifically using Force of Vigor to break up Blood Moon, I don't think you need specifically Force of Vigor as long as you're going with a cheap way to interact with artifacts against the Colossus Hammer decks.
Yeah, so with Endurance, you do lose out on some of the sideboard value against Mill, but that's fairly marginal, I think. And if you're just using it for that purpose of interfering with graveyards, there has never been any shortage of good ways to do that in Modern. So you can definitely find one there that works for you. And then Force of Vigor, you're right, it is the other one. And even though I would say Blood Moon is maybe in the Ascendant at the moment, although I haven't actually run the numbers on that, so that could be off base. Other than good insurance for a certain type of green deck against exactly Blood Moon, and I guess against the best draws from Hammer, let's say, as well. Other than that, again, that is a card which you can find worse but adequate replacements for the most part. I do think that what you alluded to with the mid-range decks being most susceptible to this kind of cost inflation is very on point, because those are the decks where if there is some new kind of generically good push mythic, it's most likely to fit in exactly those kind of decks. And you see this really in Legacy, where the Delver Shell over the years has absorbed every single new appealing card without much trouble. So first it was Ren and 6, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Oko, when that card was somehow still legal. And then most recently, of course, Ragavan, Motide Regent, Dragon's Rage Channeler, all at the same time. So yeah, if you're trying to be a Delver player staying up to date in Legacy, then this is the price you pay for getting to play the S-tier broken deck in the format all the time. And the same thing is true of Jund in Modern, if you want to play a sometimes adequate mid-range deck most of the time.
Hey, it was a little more than sometimes this weekend, but just a little bit.
Well, sure, but you really are, as you say, breaking the bank for that Zuma Jund list. But more on this topic as we get into the details here after a short break. All right, folks, we're taking a brief time out here to talk about STG Premium. And for the low price of just $7.99 a month, which is less than the cost of one collector booster, by the way, here's what you get. 5% off sealed product, 10% off singles, 15% off supplies, and that's everything from sleeves, deck boxes, to binders, and so much more. If you're making a big order to get ready for Paper Magic again, that month of premium just paid for itself. On top of that, you get more content and better content than anywhere else at the best prices. If you're here now with me and Ari and you like what you hear, you can get our weekly columns, but that's only the start. How about the literal world champion, and for my money, the best player of all time, Paulo Vitor Damagerosa? How about Pro Tour champions and Mythic champions from Joey Thompson to Autumn Buchette? We have the best standard player of all time, perhaps, in Brad Nelson, and the best limited mind in the game right now in Sam Black, and so much more. And if one piece of advice from any of us helps you win just one more round in a tournament, well, that month of premium just paid for itself many times over. Get the best discounts and the best content over at starcitygames.com/join-premium. All right, so let's delve into some of these pillars of the format here, which, if we're looking to identify one entry point, may be worth looking at. So I think one big one is Urza Saga, which it was unclear with the initial hype over Modern Horizons 2. Is it even worth buying into this card? Is this going to have to be banned before my copies even arrive in the mail? It looks like we're no longer in that territory anymore, if we ever were, which I don't think was ever the case. But Urza Saga seems to have settled into a place as both a reasonable card in Modern and a somewhat reasonably priced card in Modern relative to some of these other talking points there.
Yeah, so, just to list off numbers again, StarCityGames.com, $27.99, Urza Saga, 40 copies in stock. This is the Mox Opal of the format, right? Like, you bought those for Affinity, and you maybe bought your Ravagers, and you had that forever. I don't know if you can say the same about Urza Saga lasting forever, just because Modern's been so shocked over the last few years. But it certainly looks like it's the right power level. And I think the important part is that Urza Saga relative to like Mox Opal is way more flexible. You can build a lot more Urza Saga decks. And in terms of like actually building to somewhere else in the format, and not even just like, it gives you a lot of flexibility with what you're trying to do. And the 3 decks that kind of popped out when I was skimming through this that are Urza Saga decks that are decently in the budget range: Hardened Scales, Amulet Titan, and oddly, Hammer Time, one of the best decks in the format, is not horrible beyond the Urza Sagas.
Yeah, you do have the Stoneforge Mystic issue with Hammer Time, but like that's the other big thing, right? And if you have those already, or you have your sagas and you're looking to kind of take the jump on the ladder, then it's not too big relative to some of the other things there.
Yeah. On Magic Online, of these Hardened Scales, that might be one of the biggest upsides of that deck right now, is that it is one of the cheapest decks we're going to talk about today on Magic Online. It's like under the 200 ticket range right now. And most of that is all tied up in Urza Saga. Amulet, if you look at the prices and then you do that sideboard sweep I was talking about, a lot of your budget on it is tied up in those sideboard free spells or in Karn the Great Creator, which isn't even like super important, or like maybe in like the one Engineered Explosives is probably pretty important. And that was like the other sideboard card that's kind of like on that line of like expensive, but not like super expensive. So I think Amulet Titan is a pretty solid place to start. Dryad of the Elysian Grove is like also like a reasonable place to sink your budget into, just as like that is, you know, one of the things with recent sets is just like the ascendancy of the EDH card. Like if you look at the last like I guess there wasn't the last three standard sets. I know that like the most expensive card is the Mythic Dragon of the set. That does something with your mana. So like Dryad is a solid EDH card and like a decent place to put an investment. It's, you know, both a playable modern card and an EDH card. And that's probably what like one of the most expensive cards in the deck right now in Amulet.
Yeah, one of the more subtle big pickups, I guess, for both Hammer and Hardened Scales is Inkmoth Nexus, which is, I would say, somewhat essential for both of those. You can try and replace those, but your deck will definitely lose something as a result there. But yeah, other than that, Hardened Scales, certainly on Magic Online at least, one of the cheaper decks to buy into. And I would say one of the decks that has the most replay value as well, where like there's always a bunch of optimizations to figure out and always a bunch of like new math puzzles to be solving and so on. So it's not a, you know, people understandably get upset when their modern deck, which is their cherished joy, is portrayed as being, you know, simple or boring or repetitive or whatever. But whatever metric you use for judging a deck's personal replay value to you, Hardened Scales probably scores high on that metric. There's just a bunch of really flashy stuff you can do that's impressive and fun, and then also a bunch of this kind of small bean counting as well.
Yeah, though I will say the rule of Hardened Scales is if you ever have to ask if you're dealing enough damage, the odds are massively in the favor that your opponent is taking 10 extra damage compared to what you need to kill them.
Oh yeah, it's very good at making you feel very bad at like grade school algebra. And so if that's going to be psychologically scarring for you, then maybe stay away and put your money elsewhere, like in therapy, for example. But if that's not a sticking point for you, then yeah, by all means, go for it.
Yeah. I think the next kind of pillar to talk about is creature combo. This is we see Yawgmoth in the top 8 of these challenges, and we see the Selesnya Company deck popping up from time to time. Oddly, the Selesnya Company deck, despite falling out of favor, has a lot of weirdly expensive rares in paper. So I think that it's only really like in any kind of budget range on Magic Online, but it's pretty powerful. And depending on exactly how the metagame shapes up with like, I think the deck is pretty decent against like Rhinos and the Rakdos Ragavan decks. I would not really want to run it into like Murktide Regent Counterspell and Living End, but depending on how that breaks, you might want to look into that. but I like the Yawgmoth decks a lot as one of the options here. They're just like winning a decent amount, and the deck is pretty powerful. And like the core of what it's doing is like the money you're putting in is a lot of it's in like the green tutors that are kind of an evergreen good effect in the format.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Garrosh Messenger was very pricey for a hot minute there, but seems to have come back down to reality. So yeah, I think Yawgmoth is in that middle tier, both in terms of affordability and playability in Modern right now. Circling back to the fetchland point from earlier, are there any decks which, to be fully optimized, would need this fetchland heavy mana base, but where you can make do maybe with some other sacrifices to accommodate that?
I think that you could, like, I don't actually know how important the fetchlands over just playing more breeding pools in Amulet are. It's like a little marginal. Like you do need the lands to be forests.
Yeah.
Because of Castle Garenbrig. But once they're like forests, who cares?
Yeah, that may be literally the most marginal home for fetchlands in the format, where the first one goes a long way, I think, in terms of, allowing Dryad to trigger Valakut at instant speed and stuff like that, or double up on triggers sometimes. But even that, if you were forced to register that deck in a tournament without the fetchlands, it would be such a marginal downside. And so, yeah, I think you can definitely get away with it there. What about in the case of something like Infect, for example, which in general, I think is one of the more budget-friendly decks here. But that's another thing where if you want to play Infect at 100%, that probably involves fetchlands in some capacity, even if it's just triggering landfall on Groundswell. But can you do that in a, can you cobble together that mana base otherwise?
I think it is sketchy in fact, because I think that the like mana efficiency of like the landfall stuff for Groundswell is pretty important, where like you aren't going off on this turn, but you want to leave up your Vines of Vastwood, and then like the next turn you need the landfall in case you don't draw land. I think it's kind of messy. I think the Yawgmoth deck could do without it. Just like you literally just put more lands that produce black and green at the same time.
Right.
Like if you just played a bunch of Overgrown Tombs and Nurturing Peat lands and didn't have Verdant Catacombs, you lose a little, but like, I don't know. You can't fetch Dryad Arbor as much, but
right.
That hasn't really been a concern.
Ladder race, come on down. Darkball Pathway, your time is now.
Well, maybe not that one. That one does not tap for green into black. But Llanowar Way, sure, whatever.
Twilight Mire was randomly super expensive before its reprint a few years ago, so I don't know how well that one has aged, but it's something to consider for sure.
Yeah. I think we should consider that going through, but like the next pillar of stuff to talk about is a deck that almost certainly plays no fetch lands, and that's Urza's Tower.
Okay, I'm listening.
I mean, if you're going to put, like, Urza's Tower has been playable in Modern. I think it is the only deck that you can truly say has been playable from, like, year one of Modern to now without, like, a significant anything happening to it, which is kind of funny for all the hours that people have spent raging about banning Urza's Tower on the internet.
Yeah, if you bought the mono green Tron deck when it first came on the scene in 2012, you've had a playable modern deck for the past 9 years, and at many points you've had either a very good modern deck or at some points the best modern deck.
Yeah. 1 second. I'm looking up like exactly how many cards have changed from this initial list. Like, I guess there's no it's just like all the same cards. Expedition Map, Sphere, Star, Stirring, Scrying, Karn. Some stuff. You would be stuck with an Ayabugan, and I don't really know. Like, this deck is a lot has to change about the format for it to be completely out. It did take a big hit last fall with Cleansing Wildfire, and it feels more beatable than it used to be. But that like might honestly be a good thing for it because people aren't aiming directly at it in the same way.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago we were saying somehow Tron went from being nowhere to there were 3 copies in the top 8 of this challenge, and it seems to be everywhere again. And how did everyone get back in on the joke at the same time? And why didn't I get the memo here? So even when the deck seems to be in a bad place at the moment, that's never for too long. And when the deck is good, it's really, really good.
Yeah, the cards that are kind of like, I think you can wiggle within like the Karn the Great Creators, the Ulamog the Ceaseless Hungers, and the Wormcoil Engines to some degree right now. Like, those numbers are a little more flexible if you don't end up finding the second copy of some of them, if you're just copying a list. Or I don't even think you would necessarily have to play Karn the Great Creator. And you can work the like budget constraints on those a little bit. You probably can't negotiate on Karn Liberated, but that card in terms of like modern staples is not horrific.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago when Autumn Burchett just did well at a GP, which, in fairness, they could do with a ham sandwich, but staying on the point for now, with a non-Karn liberated mono-green Tron deck, which was kind of mind-bending at the time, and that idea never really picked up any traction, but beyond the actual Tron lands in the deck and the stuff that finds them, there aren't really that many sacred cows here, so definitely room for some customization within that space as well.
Yeah, I will let you know that it is an option to become Blue Tron person. You're allowed to do that.
That is illegal deck.
Proceed with caution. Whatever happened, like whenever we talk about Tron being something that like has been viable for the last 10 years or whatever, and you be able to use your cards. The Blue Tron players have been doing that regardless of whether it's advisable or not. Nothing can stop them. This will happen to you if you pick up Blue Tron. You're allowed to do it, and it's probably not horrific, but like, just understand that you're making a lifetime.
Yeah, everyone thinks they can just play Blue Tron once, and it's okay. They're gonna have the presence of mind to say no afterwards. You are not special. No, you won't. You will be hooked, and you will become Blue Tron person for the rest of your life, and you will be known that way. So consider if that's how you want society at large to see you moving forward. Why are Blue Tron players the way that they are? Because it's inevitable. There's no avoiding it. But that being said, if you're looking to get into Modern, this is a very fun and maybe literally the most affordable option, unless there's some massive disparity between online prices and real life prices.
I don't think so. I'd have to look back at like the Elder Deep Fiend list that has 5-0'd several leagues, to the extent that like you can't, like, one could be a lot of stuff happening at random, but two is like, or three, however many it's been, is enough to make you think that like, okay, maybe like this deck is actually doing something good. And I don't think that list has anything significantly more expensive in paper. I'm looking right now. It is, I mean, there's some like multipliers just based on the fact that like, Emrakul the Promise End is worth basically nothing on Magic Online and is like a card that costs some amount of money in paper, but not enough to really turn the dial.
Yeah, to be fair, I think the best Blue Tron deck, if you're trying to optimize it, but why would you be, probably does have Chalice of the Void. I think when you were, non-ironically, considering the deck a few years ago, that was one of the main selling points, right? As being like a good Chalice of the Void deck.
Yeah, but I think as we talked about, Chalice of the Void is not an exciting card right now.
Yeah, I think if you go back to, I guess, episode 14 or 15-ish of this podcast, we were saying just find the best Chalice deck. That is the cheat code for this weekend, or that weekend, I suppose, because Chalice on 0 is good against one half of the format, and Chalice on 1 is good against most of the other half. And it feels like the second half of that equation is no longer true in the same way. And so it's basically now a great card against Cascade, and you can find applications elsewhere, but it's not necessary or incredibly impactful there. And so with that in mind, maybe you can move away from that if you have other options lined up.
Yeah, I certainly would not be playing Blue Tron for the purpose of playing Chalice.
You're playing Blue Tron because it's a good time.
I did once in the summer of 2019, and maybe it'll happen again. Urza's Tower is a totally fine place to be. And I think that bridges us to the other linears, which are all varying degrees of expensive right now. Burn is probably like the traditional, this is where you buy into Modern if you're looking for a budget option. we talked about the mono red deck, mono red list of burn being like pretty affordable, but I think once you discount the fact that like you're just gonna have to own fetchlands at some point anyways to long term participate in modern, I don't think it's a big ask to like add the white cards to burn.
Yeah, and even if you do stay mono red, then you're going to have an interest in Fiery Islet, Sunbait Canyon in some capacity. I guess you pick whichever of those is the cheapest at that time. But yeah, I think burn, it stands out here not just because of the total cost, but because you can build in and get a somewhat functional prototype and then slowly add to that from there. And that often can be a more satisfying way to arrive at that eventual ending than just buying in wholesale in one go and having a fully fledged modern deck.
Yeah, and I think that this is a deck that like really fits the metric of like, you owned all the old cards, what are you going to do? It's just, you're going to play burn. I won a Pro Tour qualifier in late 2018 with a burn list, and I'm pretty sure the only thing that has changed in terms of like cards you would need to obtain are the Sunbait Canyons and Urza.
Yes, definitely the Lurus. Please do not leave home without that card if you're playing the white cards. And I guess like exactly one Flame Rift to add to the box of possible playables.
Probably not. I'd probably look for the Roiling Vortexes next, but again, that's like a not important. You know, it's from Battle for Zendikar. Nothing from that set is actually worth amounts of money somehow.
Yeah, that one's not breaking the bank. Anything else here to round out the segment?
Yeah, I think that like you could do worse than starting with any of Mill, Dredge, or Infect right now. And again, I guess Mill has a lot of new cards, but Dredge doesn't have a ton. Infect, I think it's like kind of like into the deep cuts right now, and a lot of what Infect has to offer is Phyrexian Crusader, and you have to like, I think the Ignoble Hierarchs are a pretty big deal there. But it's not horrible. I would caution against playing Infect, depending on how many Dragon's Rage Channelers you expect to play against, even with the Crusaders. Like that's going to be the bad matchup, just the pressure and cheap interaction. But I don't think Infect is like, you know, we've seen the Hammer deck do pretty well against the field, and Infect is offering a pretty similar set of skills. Mill, I think, is good. People are like alternating between not being able to beat it and like playing an Eldrazi. I did not break down exactly which cards in Mill were the budget breakers. I guess you have to own Archive Traps, which is like...
I think the issue with Mill from a budget perspective is threefold, actually. So firstly is, as you say, this is the flip side of the issue that the mid-range decks have with being so generic that all the new cards fit in them, is that a deck like Mill or Infect is they have interest in very specific tools, and then once you have those, there's not really any crossover with any other deck. So yeah, you buy your Archive Traps and those go in Mill, and that's about it. Unless they actually do reprint Doomsday in Modern Horizons 3 or whatever, then those Archive Traps are not getting put to use. Secondly, players love Mill cards, right? And so stuff like Glimpse the Unthinkable or whatever, not that card is even in a lot of the contemporary Mill lists, but the point applies across the board. Those cards always have a much higher price tag than you would expect because, hey, players love Mill, and maybe you're one of those players, but there are many of you out there all fighting over the table scraps. And then thirdly, it's that you're an 8 crab deck, and so fetchlands at that point really are a necessity. You can't really do much without those. So if you get to the point of thinking, well, I'm going to need fetchlands at some point in my modern career, then I'm going to make that my main investment, then sure. But otherwise, I think you do become appreciably worse without those cards in your deck. One thing that's worth mentioning here is, of course, everyone has their own preferences and play styles. And so some of these options, which we're highlighting as good budget options, are not going to be appealing on those grounds, right? Like if the idea of playing Tron doesn't appeal to you, then fair enough, right? That's off the board, and you don't want to buy into something that's not going to be enjoyable for you. But also, I think even if you were kind of agnostic in that sense, then if this is meant to be a deck which you're playing time and time again because this is your one modern deck, then you want that to click with you in some way, or at least to not grow old too quickly. And so that's something to keep in mind here, where, again, with the usual caveats about every deck has some stuff that you can glean from it and discover in it and so on, you want to be conscious of, okay, I'm going to enjoy this in week 1. Am I going to enjoy this in week 6 or 15 or however long you end up playing this for? And similarly, depending on how the format moves, how are the swings and roundabouts going to be with this deck? Because to take Dredge as an example, if people want to hate you out, they can hate you out. And if Dredge has a good weekend and the format at large decides they want to do that, then, the next one you play in might be a real uphill battle. And so that can apply certainly in Modern with sideboard cards for these linear decks, but also just in terms of polarized matchups. So you mentioned Infect as a deck which there are some decks where like literally their worst conceivable matchup is Infect, and then other decks just naturally line up very well against Infect without even trying. Although, having said that, beating those second class of decks with Infect is often such a satisfying feeling, where you thread your exact combination of 3 pump spells around the 2 removal spells that you read them for in exactly the right way to seal the win out from the jaws of defeat. That feels incredibly satisfying, and that high can last for weeks.
Yeah, I normally caution against playing decks that give you that kind of maneuvering, like, I've solved the exact puzzle, because too often they lead you down this path of like, oh, I should have figured exactly what to do out here, when in reality, like, you've just played like 10 matches, and like realistically, like, even if you see the solution to the puzzle after the fact, that was like this chain of 44% branching paths that you would have to take to get to that, and like the right decision, you just lose. And eventually, like, the odds cascade away in the end, and you're like 40% of the time you feel real smart for winning, and then you lose the other 60%. When you're talking about buying into a budget deck and committing and being like, I'm going to play this for a while, I don't think that really matters. And I think it's actually kind of useful to put yourself in those situations time and time again, which I think is weirdly an argument for Dredge. I think that deck puts itself in a lot of weird situations these days.
Yeah, I don't know if Dredge has transferable skills in that sense, where Dredge is less like a Magic deck than any other Magic deck, if that makes sense, where you're just doing something so outside the realms of what anything else can do. But that can also be its unique appeal, right? And there are definitely people who have played Dredge across the years time and time again. And firstly, just even if you have perfect deck liquidity and so on, that's a great skill to have access to, because Dredge is one of those decks where sometimes the stars align and you pick the right spot for it, and it is, you just clear through the tournament without even trying. And being able to pick it up blind on short notice is a great skill to have there. But then also, it's a deck which even the players who have dabbled in everything and played a ton of Magic like to come back to from time to time, because it does put you in those situations that no other Magic deck for those reasons can put you in.
Yeah, I do want to make 2 comments on recent content. One is there was a Dave Humphreys Twitter thread where this was exactly played out, where he asked like what deck that won a lot or was very good were you unable to play with, and there were a lot of very good players who were just like, I don't understand Dredge. So there is a very specific skill set. The other is Todd Anderson's recent article about unbanning Faithless Looting, and I think the precursor for any discussion there that everyone kind of agrees on is banning Stinkweed Imp. I think that of the decks that we've listed here, it is probably the highest risk investment in terms of bans to play Dredge, just because Dredge just does things to people. And it's also just like not, when Dredge is too good, it is like really, really not good for Magic. And it is the first thing that will just immediately get smacked with a ban before anyone tries to think of anything else.
I do think that once you have the pieces of Dredge and you're trying to pick up the pieces after the deck gets obliterated from orbit, then you can take those over to something else. And in this hypothetical that Todd raised, where looting gets unbanned and then Dredge probably has to lose a few things to make that possible, then your Dredge core can go into a looting deck of some kind and still be pretty good. And maybe that's Hollow One, maybe that's some deck that doesn't even exist yet, and is a glint in Todd Addison's eye. But for now, if you buy into Dredge, I think that's a fine choice. And then if there is that kind of radical shakeup, I think it's going to be somewhat easy to recover from that.
Yeah, I guess most of the dredge specific cards are the inexpensive stuff, and the expensive stuff is actually mostly fetchlands. So it's not the worst spot to be in if that happens, but it is a lot of like emotional equity that is easily erased. I want to just kind of bring back the mill point. I was looking at the Magic Online prices when I put this on here, and mill is like pretty reasonable there. I would not look into it on paper for like a lot of reasons. We talked about the mill cards, but like there's just random stuff like Oboro that is actually just like really critical to the deck's functionality. And that card is just like off the charts. I know Cedric and Patrick went over this. I think it is literally the most expensive card in Saviors of Kamigawa by like a matter of a multiplier. I'd have to look up what it is on Star City Games now, but it was, I want to say like $79.99 when they ran.
You hold your horses on that. I will look it up. Give me a guess. Give me a ballpark figure as to what you think it is.
I think it was $79.99, and that was like a month ago. So it could literally be, $130 because who knows? I don't understand the appeal of Aurora. I don't get it. It's very good in this exact situation and in like the Merfolk Choke situation, but I can't imagine isn't the point of Commander to like have mana and put your cards on the battlefield? And like I don't want to put a land from my battlefield into my hand because I want to tap my mana to do something.
Well, okay. First of all, there's the that art, which is absolute banger. I mean, in a block that has some truly incredible art, and certainly for its time, Oboro stands out definitely as one of the best. But on top of that, I think there are a bunch of commanders recently where either they trigger off landfall because to tie into BFZ or not BFZ, Zendikar Rising, or they like reward you for having a bunch of permanents in play, or there's the Kodama of the East Tree, I think it is, where you do something and then there's like a cascade for permanents in your hand or whatever it is. But lots of like weird tricksy stuff you can get up to with a borrow in that format for the cool price of $75 over at StarCityGames.com. Although actually, okay, it's out of stock for near mint, but a played copy or 7 of them can be yours for only $64.15 a piece, or you can get a foil Oboro, Palace in the Clouds, for the princely sum of, Ari, what would you care to guess here?
I looked at it. It's sold out at $249.99. And I will say that every single copy of Oboro is played because it was thrown into the corner of the game store after the draft. Like it, Saviors, anyways. Listen to... I'm not going to get into it. I like that set more than Patrick and Cedric did, but you can listen to that Resleevables and just hear a man's soul break. Yeah, it's great.
There are 2 playable cards from that set. There's Pithing Needle, which, unique card, reprinted a ton since then, doesn't feel unique to the set in any way. And then there's Oboro, which has never been reprinted, quite possibly never will be reprinted, and as a result, it's basically the only playable card from a highly obscure set from 15 years ago. So that's how we get here.
Yeah, I know you wrote last week about the reanimator decks in the format. How have those kind of fit into the budget range? Because we might have a contender for that somewhere else in this episode, but I haven't looked at like the actual price of every single option within that subset because I only really played. I got a chance to play with the Indomitable Creativity hybrid list, which is like clearly breaking a lot of budget.
Yeah, more on that one in a little bit in another segment, perhaps. But all of the core Reanimator stuff is actually very cheap. So your Persist, your Unmarked Graves, your Archon of Cruelties even, which you might think would be the big ticket item there. The issue comes with the supporting cast because one point we mentioned in our episode on why does black suck in Modern and what would the Reanimator shell need to succeed is the answer is a backup plan, right? And so depending on what that is, it's some combination of like Liliana of the Veil and other fair cards, Seasoned Pyromancer, Grief, whatever, which all run you a decent amount, or it's Urza Saga, which again, we've mentioned before, or it's Stoneforge Mystic, which is somehow the most expensive of the 3. So however you slice it, and of course, if you are going into the Stoneforge Mystic stuff, then there's the whole mana-based issues to work your way around. And I guess those crop up anyway to some extent if you want to be doing the Priest of Felright stuff, which I think you do in most of these shells. But yeah, it is weird because the core premise of those decks is fine, but it's everything else around it that drags it up there.
Okay. So we talked about diversifying, strategies, giving people different options. We have talked about a lot of kind of broken decks. I do want to say I would not recommend anyone, like a lot of the hard combo decks in Modern, like the Belcher deck we talked about, like Adnaz, are things that are actually like fairly cheap. I would not recommend starting there because one, the cards don't go anywhere besides that, and two, they're not good. So we can skip right past that. But what about the tribal decks? Would you advise any of these? Like Paul Rietzel did 5-0 a league with Merfolk,
Sure. I do enjoy Paul Rietzel's aging into Modo retirement, where he just pops up every now and again to 5-0 league with Merfolk, or I played against him in a standard PTQ where he was on some like Luca Transmogrify token deck, which looked really cool but was solidly unplayable. But it's kind of nice to just like encounter that kind of species in the wild these days. But I think the dividing point there is like exactly Cavern of Souls, where for 5-color humans, for example, or I don't know, slivers or some of these more adventurous tribes, if you need Cavern of Souls as a form of mana fixing, then you kind of really do need that card, and that's going to be an issue. Whereas if it is, let's say, exactly Merfolk, and I know some of those decks don't even run Cavern of Souls, or at least in high numbers, and it's just there almost as a free roll, at that point, that takes a decent amount of the expense off the table. Merfolk specifically, part of the appeal there is getting to be a Force of Negation deck, but if you're not a Force of Negation deck, sometimes Merfolk is still going to be good enough. So, maybe that's one route in is, you get the cheap Merfolk stuff, and then you play that for a bit, and then once you can work your way up to forces, that completes that deck and also gives you a good starting point for something else if you want to diversify there.
Yeah, I think the buy-in point after Cavern might be Ether Vial, and that is not a negotiable card once you start talking about that. The other tribal deck that kind of came to mind was the Goblins deck, but I think that some of the Goblin stuff is like pretty awkward to obtain. That deck's powerful, but it definitely needs the 2-color mana. And yeah, I'm looking at this right now, and we're just gonna scratch that as a budget option for a lot of reasons here. Did you like Blackleaf Cliffs and Anti-Hovel are like lanes that you won't really get a lot of use out of, that are just like expensive everywhere? I guess the core like conspicuous Snoop stuff is fine, but yeah, it's kind of dicey on a lot of levels.
Yeah, Blackleaf Cliffs, at least some of the like the Rakdos or Mardu Ragavan decks have an interest in that, or really most of the black-red decks in Modern, although a lot of those have a lot of additional expense attached. So Cliffs doesn't even really help to add as a springboard there.
Yeah, you might be able to make it work with Goblins, and I think that is the tribal deck that I have the most faith in being good, just because of the core combo aspect of it. The Conspicuous Snoop Bogart Harbinger combo is really good. But I think that tribal decks also have this issue of like, I don't want to run any of these against people playing Fury. I think that like at least with the linear decks, when you get hit by a hate card, you feel like you deserved it and your deck does something powerful. Whereas like with these decks, it's like, yeah, that card exists and everything is terrible.
So anything else on this main topic there? I think we've covered most of the options that come to mind, but it is possible I'm missing something here.
Okay, so I had 3 fair decks, and I think we covered one of them as options if you want to play something that is more mid-rangey. One, if you actually owned cards from before Modern Horizons 2, the Orzhov Stoneblade decks are like largely, a lot of the budget there is pushed into like lands and Stoneforge Mystic. So you could look into those. Liliana as well, which is, again, an older card. We talked about Prowess. I think that you could build the full-on Izzet or Boros Prowess decks that have popped up for like a not horrific amount. And I think that those decks are like the cheapest close to good fair deck. And then the other one is the Gruul deck, which on occasion has Ragavan, but like doesn't have a lot of other extreme overlap in terms of like pricey cards that would, like get pushed up by the other archetypes. And you are picking up like your, Bone Crusher Giants or whatever that will be useful elsewhere. I think the big ticket there is Seasoned Pyromancer.
Yeah, that one is another one which doesn't jump to mind as a barrier in cost terms, but it's just a very good mythic rare from Modern Horizons 1, which goes in most decks that can feasibly cast it. And so that's going to place a floor on how cheap it can ever be.
Yeah, I think that deck is, I don't like it right now, but I think it has like a lot of potential in the future because the cards that are going to improve it actually will appear in standard because it's just like some stupid 4-drop.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think that about wraps it up. I think the general summary is there's a lot of options. You're going to have to make some commitment, but if you are constrained on a budget and like looking at these modern deck lists that are playing all of these cards that are just like wild in price, there are options for you to actually have a competitive presence in the format without having to obtain every single one of those.
All right, so with that in mind, we can move on to some decks which no guarantee of affordability, but a cast iron guarantee of nonsense here after a short break.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than with StarCityGames.com. Make the best of our 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry when you use any of our 4 simple ways to sell located at StarCityGames.com/sell. You can check out our buy list, box up your cards and send them our way with the ship and sell program. Come on in to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia for that personal touch. Or if you have everything, 500,000 cards, you want to store and you want to move some bulk, we'll come to you. And seriously, when we're talking about these large collections, Star City does mean they will come to you. The list of places goes from Ohio to New Jersey and elsewhere. Like, seriously, I've driven from Ohio to New Jersey. That is not a short drive. So head on over to StarCityGames.com/sell, that's SELL, for more details on all these great options and maybe clear up a little space in your life for your next project, even if that happens to just be even more Magic cards or another Commander deck.
Okay, let's close this out here with our nonsense of the week. And this time around, I don't think there's any one deck which is a clear standout, but the bench is deep here. There's a lot to get to.
Okay, let's start with the fact that I was going to throw Cedric under the bus for playing Titan Shift in 2021, but he did say on stream just hours before we recorded this that he would not play that deck in a serious fashion. So I think that gives him a little bit of credit. If you haven't seen the latest list, there is some cool stuff going on. It's playing Wish instead of Scapeshift, and the Scapeshift is in the sideboard. So you still have that same pattern of like 7 mana, you Wish, you Scapeshift, you win the game. But instead of like having a bunch of dead Scapeshifts, you can wish for like lands, ramp spells, whatever. So I don't think it's good, but it's not horrific.
I kind of think it's genius, actually. I would need to play with it myself and, be scarred by Titan Shift once again. And maybe I'll come in here with a different tune that I'll be singing next week. But I don't know. I think this patches up a lot of holes in the deck. So beyond lands, which should not go overlooked here, because that is one of the common fail cases of Titan Shift, that even in a deck that has 27, 28 lands as a starting point and a bunch of ramp spells, you're doing that because you need to hit every single land drop. Your deck is designed to get to 6 or 7 lands and then cast action. And so you end up with some of the issues that a classic ramp deck has of you have a bunch of ramp and not enough action. And sometimes you need something from one of those columns and not the other. And Wish can be either. So as you mentioned, you have those Scapeshift lines when you get to 7 lands. If you're having trouble getting to 7 lands, Wish can be a land. It can be, maybe you have 3 Valakut main deck and 1 in the sideboard, for example, if you have more of a focus on Dryad, for example. So I think there are a bunch of ways to build that list with Wish in mind, where it is fairly promising. And then on top of that, you can do stuff like you get Alpine Moon to kill Urza Saga or Urza's Tower. You can deal with that if you like, or it's a way to tutor up something like Nature's Claim for Blood Moon. You could get Chalice of the Void against the Cascade decks to buy a lot of equity there in game 1. And then if you do think that Blood Moon is going to be an issue, for example, then at the cost of, let's say, 2 sideboard slots, you have a Nature's Claim and a Foundation Breaker, suddenly your deck between Summoner's Pact and the Foundation Breaker, and then Wish and the sideboard Nature's Claim, that already is 9 answers to a Blood Moon to let you hedge against that. So once you build your sideboard with Wish in mind, I think it actually opens up a decent amount of interesting space.
Yeah, I think the problem is that like you open up all this space within this metric of like I'm spending 4 mana for this effect and then also playing Titan Shift.
Yeah, it is a deck which just structurally has a lot of flaws, and it can never, almost regardless of what new cards it picks up, it can never bring itself down to the level of the Ragavan decks and the Hammer decks and so on, because fundamentally you are a Ram deck trying to cast Primeval Titan and Scapeshift and so on, and there's only so much economizing you can do within that constraint. Okay,
let's talk about a different way to Primeval Titan, because Michael Majors had some straight up nonsense on Twitter.
As always, yeah. So this is not the only hybrid Indomitable creativity deck that we've seen in recent times here. So Major's idea was, what if the creativity target isn't Velomachus or Emrakul or whatever, it's just Primeval Titan. And so we can add 2 Valakuts to the deck, and by doing that, you actually bring the deck to a somewhat reasonable land count in contrast to many of the previous lists, although those 2 new lands are Valakuts, which if Dwarven Mine is somewhat awkward with your early sequencing sometimes, then wait until you see Valakut. But once you creativity into Titan and it's fetching, 2 Valakuts or Valakut and another land, it's almost like its job is done, in the sense that if the opponent has Teferi Time Raveler to bounce it, or they have Solitude, or they have Unholy Heat, whatever it is, however they're planning to interact with your creature, then you are at the point where Valakut is online, and your natural land drops now all represent at least 3 damage. Or if you can follow up with a hard cast Primeval Titan, because the first trigger got you to 6 mana, and so if you drew a second Titan, that is much better than drawing the second Emrakul, for example. You just cast that and win a fair-ish game of Magic that you've now constructed.
Yeah, and I think one thing to talk about with these decks that I think the actual kind of more traditional Wrenn and 6 Teferi versions of this deck are leaning towards is that having the Indomitable creativity for X=2 be a relevant thing is huge. And double Primeval Titan is that's game. I don't really know how else to say it. Which I think brings us to the next deck on this list, which is the hybrid creativity reanimator deck that I believe Spider Space, we might have mentioned this last episode, but Spider Space was playing this. It's like Unmarked Grave, Persist, a couple Archon of Cruelties, and then the Creativity Shell. I just wanted to bring this up because I played it. I think there's a bit of promise there, but there's a lot of issues with like your Inquisition of Kozilek. You can draw a hand that's like Inquisition of Kozilek, Persist, Indomitable Creativity, Archon. Like it just, you can draw these hands that are so bad and none of the pieces work together. But I think that like you could play like Thought Seizes instead of the Inquisitions, and then like load up on Archons, and like Archon and Sarah Emissary are both really good. And like the creativities give you a backup plan for when the Graveyard Hate shows up. There's something there beneath the surface, but I think it's got to be retooled from where it's at.
Yeah, I think the shell is promising. The issue is that the demands of the Reanimator shell mean Archon has to be your main payoff, although Sarah's Emissary can be as well. And that one is quite polarized in the sense that some decks literally cannot beat that card, certainly in game 1 scenarios, whereas other decks just shrug it off or don't really care. And Archon is much easier to beat on turn 4 than it is on turn 2. And so often, if creativity into Archon is your first meaningful play of the game, that is not good enough a lot of the time, which is a statement about how fast and how efficient Modern is these days. And as you mentioned, even though the pieces do work somewhat well together, where Prismari Command is not just creating a treasure token that you can creativity into something, it's also discarding an Archon that's in your hand and digging for the persist to reanimate it. You do get these hands sometimes where you draw a bunch of Archons and like an unmarked grave or something, and it's hard to actually get piece A and piece B at the same time.
Yeah, I will say that hitting double Archon off of creativity is a lot. And I think that you want to be playing Lightning Bolt on top of that. I had a lot of games where you actually the stretch damage setup part of that setup was actually really relevant, and you would actually kill your opponent with like some Dwarven Mind chip shots and the triggers and some bolts.
Yeah. Having said that, going back to what you said about Primeval Titan, having creativity 4/2 into double Archon, if one Archon sometimes isn't good enough, two Archons almost always is. And even if somehow both of those Archons are dealt with, now they certainly are in range of one getting persisted back and that being enough, or Lightning Bolt plus Prismari Command joining together for the final burst of damage. So you certainly can win the longer games that way as well.
Okay. What if we cut all the colors from this deck? Because we've got a nice one from Magic Online user Dave_Austin TX. We have some classic Benzo Reanimator. Again, if you listen to the Receivables, you may have heard the origin of this deck's name of just being that mono black guy from some store in the 90s who always played mono black Reanimator. And this is like the truest version of it. It's just like black cards and Reanimator targets.
Is Gyruda. And it's funny that because of the limits on the tools you have available, that this companion Gyruda as a card is just in the deck because Gyruda can chain into any of the following: Grave Titan, Solemn Simulacrum. That's a low ball hit, right? You're not too pleased with that one, but Solemn Simulacrum, Grave Titan, Archon Cruelty, Grizzlebrand, or Sundering Titan. So you get to spin the wheel, and there are some decent hits within there. And then the reanimation spells, it's not Persist, it's not Goryo's Vengeance, it's not any of the ones we've become accustomed to. It's 1 Rip of Erebos and 4 Footsteps of the Goryo. So this is one which you tend to only see in conjunction with Protein Hulk, but this is 2 in a black, sorcery, return target creature card from your graveyard to play, and then sacrifice it at end of turn. So no haste, you don't get to attack with any of these, but you can imagine Footsteps on Sundering Titan, Footsteps for Gyruda to dig up any of these things. I mean, even Footsteps for Solemn Simulacrum in, there are standard formats where that would be a good play. And then, so you get to, there's just some weird stuff going on here, which I find incredibly charming.
Yeah. Did we get to the part where this is also an Urborg Cabal Coffers deck, and then you can use the Urborg with your Sundering Titan to blow up their non-basics?
Oh god, just blow up your Urza Tower with my Sundering Titan? Fan me down. Your Urza Saga? Oh yeah. So, and we haven't actually seen Cabal Coffers make a mark literally at all, I think. I don't think it's the first appearance for that card in the 5-0 deck list done, but we're talking single digits here, so nice to see that one on the map, if not in a show that I expect to see ever again, outside of this person just running it back.
Yeah, there was, let me see if I think I may have linked the wrong deck list in the document, but on the subject of mono black boomer status, there is a Magic Online user, YZA, who has been iterating on Pox for the last few weeks. I think we may have discussed a previous list of theirs, which first hybridized small Pox with Timeless Dragon. And they have next leveled that yet again by putting Braid's Cabal Minion in their latest 5-0 list, which is just, I think you are legally obligated to highlight that because Braids is just such a iconic card.
Yeah, that one's a real blast from the past. One thing we should absolutely not skip over from that mono black reanimated deck is Mind Slicer in the sideboard. This is 2 black for a 4/3. When Mind Slicer is put into a graveyard from play, or I guess dies in modern parlance, each player discards their hand. So this is one of those cards which snuck into Modern via 8th or 9th edition, and there were some real weird ones in those sets, which I don't know if Cedric and Patrick will ever get to the core sets, but those ones might be worth a look. There's some odd ones in there for sure. And so you can combine Mind Slicer either with Footsteps of the Goryo, just to nuke everyone's hands from orbit, or with Bone Shards, which is a great addition to the deck. So, kill the one big thing you have in play and nuke your entire hand and hopefully have something left over to show for it.
I mean, you have cards in your graveyard in your Reanimator deck, so it might be a little better for you.
I mean, we have a Castle Locthwain as well. So just you start redrawing, piecing our hand back together for for a low cost.
Boom. Done. Lock it in. Okay, so our last nonsense of the week, I love. This is enchantment combo tribal. Okay, so how do you like Jeskai Ascendancy?
Love it.
Okay, how do you like Underworld Breach?
Love it even more, if that's possible.
What if you had the ability to play those and another enchantment that also goes off in a combo fashion?
There are lots of those. Is there some Pyromancer Ascension action going on here? What do we got?
Can I interest you in Song of Creation?
All right.
Okay, so this deck is a Dragon's Rage Channeler deck, which I want to mention up front because I think that's one of the good things about it. And it is kind of just casting a bunch of spells and going off with one of these various enchantments. There's 4 songs, 2 breaches, and an ascendancy, which kind of implies like the idea is that you are primarily going somewhere with song. Underworld Breach is how you go from somewhere to the actual win. And then Jeskai Ascendancy is just like nice to have, I guess. The end games involve like looping Noxious Revivals or just kind of like casting a bunch of zeros and eventually going somewhere into a grape shot. I'm kind of not into the low number of expressive iterations in this deck, but I think that there's a lot of good stuff going on. And I like that this deck is starting to hybridize like normal deck elements with a combo kill. And I think that that's actually something that people should be looking into in the future. This deck, I'm going to have to goldfish it a few times, but it was one of those like really eye-catching things that is like, oh, that is kind of a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I will note that Dragon's Rage Channeler, on top of just being a fantastic Magic card, is pretty obscene with Underworld Breach, where I don't know what the right shot is, and certainly don't know if this is the right shot for it, but that interaction, if you can break it, you deserve whatever tournament win that bestows upon you, because that makes it shockingly easy to go either deterministically infinite or like pseudo infinite with Underworld Breach, where like let's say you have 2 channelers and a breach, every Mishra's Bauble you cast is surveilling 2 cards, which then means you only need 1 more to get the bauble back and so on. And so you just tear through your deck shockingly quickly, and it ends up compounding on itself, where once you have 1 channeler going with breach, you're milling so much of your deck that then soon you find the second channeler, and then you're going even faster. And then once you find the third channeler, like that's Yahtzee. That just is infinite at that point, almost whatever you're doing.
Yeah, that sounds like one of those situations where you just run out of cards in your deck.
Oh, you definitely do. And you can't pass a turn because then all your bauble triggers are going to catch up to you. But once you get through your entire deck, I assume you have some way to stitch that together into a win there. So yeah, I love the look of this list, and I have wanted Song of Creation to be good since I saw it on the Ikoria spoiler. Not too good, because then we have some real serious issues in whatever format it is. But hopefully this is finally that card's time to shine. We also have some unlisted late additions to Nonsense of the Week here. So one of them, courtesy of my friend Aaron Burns-Lees, who goes by Raging Tilt Monster on Magic Online, and we featured one of their lists before, I believe. This is Rhinos with a twist. So we mentioned Bloodbraid Marauder in the past as a card which is so alluring in terms of think of all the things you could do with this card, but it seems like the setup cost is just too high. And Aaron really went deep on trying to prove us wrong there. So this is Temur Footfalls, Temur Rhinos, with 12 Cascade spells, because we have Agent, Outburst, and now Marauder. And we are doing a lot of interesting stuff to set up Marauder here. So we have Archetypes of Will as a 1-mana cycler that's 2 card types because it's an artifact and a creature. We have Street Wraith, of course, which you would assume would be in a Living End deck, but joining the cast now in Rhinos just as a way to get a card type in the graveyard for free. We have Fury as just a great form of interaction, which you can pitch an Excess Marauder to that as well, as a way to get a creature in a graveyard. But the real star here might be Incubation Incongruity. So there's a lot of text here to get through, but it's a Incubation is 1 mana for blue-green hybrid. It's a sorcery. You look at the top 5 cards, you can put a creature from among those into your hand. So the base case is you find a Fury to nuke their board, find a Street Racer Cycle if you want that. You can find a Brazen Borrower as a form of interaction. Or you can find Shardless Agent or Marauder as your Cascade spell. So between having 12 of those and the redundancy from Incubation, you're going to have a Cascade spell almost all of the time. And that was one of the weaknesses of classic Rhinos, is your non-Cascade draws just didn't really do anything. And now you just don't really have any of those. But the other half of this, crucially, is an instant. So this card has 2 card types, and it costs 3. So the combined cost is 4. That puts it above the range of all of your Cascade spells. And so Incongruity is an instant which exiles target creature and its controller creates a 3/3. So a very expensive riff on like the Pongify, Rapid Hybridization family of cards. But hey, if you're able to pay for that effect, often that's going to catch people by surprise and be, you know, a crucial thing to have access to. And then it's just another form of interaction in this deck, which kind of coheres perfectly with everything else you're trying to do here. As well as, you know, it's a blue-green card, so pitch out to Force a Vigor, or Force Negation, or Endurance, and we've heard that joke many, many times before as well.
Wow, that's a lot. I would not have thought about putting a cheap card into my Cascade deck. That certainly qualifies as Nonsense of the Week.
No, okay, no sarcasm here. I think this is worth at least tipping our collective cap to.
Yeah, I agree that it is worth a hat tip for sure. That is an impressive deck on a few levels. There's a lot of mad science going on. I think you are losing a lot of interaction along the way, but it's a lot of good mad science.
Yeah. And then the other one, which automatically qualifies as Nonsense of the Week, is Soulflayer, which people have certainly tried to make work in Modern in the past, but some new additions from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which literally no other deck could ever want to care about. And it's, as the old saying goes, if you're one of these people who only ever plays combo in Eternal formats, let's say, then your experience during preview season is so unlike anyone else's, because you only care about these niche and narrow things. And Soulflayer, if you are a Soul player, is the perfect example of that, right? You are looking for the 7-drop that has the exact right mix of keyword abilities to, you know, juice up your Soulflayer in a certain way. And it turns out that this is maybe the only chance that Adult Gold Dragon is going to have to shine in Modern, because that one has flying, haste, and lifelink. And so that, in conjunction with Fury, which is a playable card that you can traverse for, Grizzly Salvage for, that has double strike, it turns out that your Soulflayers have more time to do their thing and are better when they're doing their thing now. So still don't know if they're good enough, even given all of that, but I certainly want to believe that they are.
That is interesting, because I think that while those abilities have existed together on a card, there hasn't been one printed at like anywhere close to a playable rate before. So that's where the interesting part of that is.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get to turn 4 and you're Sylvan Caryatid, cast your Adult Gold Dragon, and you get to work, you know?
Yeah, the Soulflayer decks plan, like the backup plan for those decks really is something else.
Yeah, this has to be kind of an absurd grief deck as well, right? Where like it puts a card type in there for free, and you can traverse or Grizzly Salvage for it, and it clears the way for your Soulflayer for free.
Yeah,
and you can delve it away too.
That all makes sense. Yeah, it gives Menace. Menace is technically an ability that matters.
Sure, I always found it kind of sad that like a Chroma Angel of Wrath with all of its many, many abilities somehow is not good enough for the Soulflayer deck, which is the only place it could ever show up anymore.
Yeah, that is an unfortunate. I kind of wish that we got to play some more of those old school big things, but they've been obsolete for a decade now. You know, it was original Zendikar when Iona was first printed, and I think that was around the death knell for them.
Yeah, so definitely a boomer card for sure, but anyone who was getting into Magic around that time will remember the feeling of awe they first had looking at that card. I think that officially, though, is going to do it for Nonsense of the Week here. So I don't think we've decided on our topic for next week yet. We're going to have to get in the lab and come up with something there. But you will know that when all of us do. And so in the meantime, it's been fun talking to you as always. We'll talk to all of you again soon. Take care, everyone.